It's homecoming season in Texas, and you know what that means. Giant blinged out mums. We met the students who wear them and the women who make them in Homecoming Mums, a Texas-sized tradition, which you can watch wherever you're watching this right now. But the number one question we heard about mums is, how did this all start? I took that question to Amy Schultz, author of Mumentous, a new book full of original photos and mostly true stories about football, glue guns, moms, and this supersized high school tradition.
How did Mumentous even begin to form for you?
So I'm a photographer and a writer. And like a lot of people who are not originally from Texas, when you transplant into Texas, there's a lot to learn about all of Texas culture. And, I think it's important to be where you are. And so I'm a curious person. So because I didn't grow up with Texas homecoming moms, I entered into the flow, I guess you might say, of the tradition as an adult. And so I had more of an adult point of view, and I don't have kids. So I got curious about the tradition when my friends' kids started getting into it. And I don't know, it's such a visually stunning tradition. As a photographer, I felt like something was really missing in the visual storytelling about moms, because all I ever saw, and using a term that we're all familiar with, is portraiture. All I ever saw were photographs of kids standing still in their mums, posing, on the front stoop or at the moment of the mom exchange. And I thought, this can't be it. This is not the whole story. And so I started exploring what it really meant to have a mom. And then it just sort of snowballed from there. Also, I was so interested in the mom's story. So not the wearer of the mom, but the mom of the mom. And when I say mom, I'm using that as a broad term. This could be a grandma or a special aunt, or even just a special woman in someone's life. And so I started realizing, like most traditions, the focal point isn't maybe the most interesting thing, right? And so as I started to take my camera away from the mom itself and started looking around in the peripheral, I could see all these different aspects of the mom story, and then I couldn't stop myself. And it went from a project to a passion, to really learn everything that I could. And then I'll tell you a little bit more about what that meant before I wrote a book.
What was the original assignment, or I guess what was the original idea that sort of sparked it?
The first thing that I ever did when it came to homecoming moms, besides seeing the supplies in a Michael's store and not knowing what they were, like I thought they were Christmas decorations and I couldn't figure it out. So my first assignment was something I assigned myself, since this was just a passion project. And I went with a friend to go make mums for Nolan Catholic High School in Fort Worth. A group of women were getting together to make mums to sell as a band booster club. This was a few years back. And I found out that I was not capable enough to handle a glue gun. But by gosh, I could cut ribbons in the same and equal lengths. And so that is what I did. But because I'm a photographer, I brought my camera and I started taking pictures of these women. And as I'm looking through my lens and I'm sort of seeing, the scene, and also the camera kind of helps me remove myself from the scene, what I saw was something like what I imagine a quilting bee might be. And it reminded me a little bit of when my mom used to get together with other women to make Christmas ornaments for a church bazaar. And there was just something universal about it that I didn't expect at all. And it touched my heart. And from that moment on, I thought, I think maybe I'm understanding this at an emotional level that I did not expect. And I couldn't stop myself after that.
That's what one of the new moms that I talked to, when she was first introduced to the idea of moms, she thought it was silly. She thought it was frivolous. She thought it was ridiculous. She thought they were garish. And then she got a chance to sit in a class with her daughter. She made the mum for her daughter, and her daughter made one for her buddy on dance team.
So sweet.
And I asked her after, how do you feel about it now? And she got pretty sentimental because she's like, when am I going to get another 2 hours to sit down with my teen daughter and do a craft? And not just a craft that years from now, she'll be able to pull out a box and say, I remember making that with my mom.
It's powerful.
It really is.
It can be. And I think I admire her for getting over her preconceived notions and sort of jumping in and swimming with the tide, because she didn't know that that's where she was going to end up, right? And yet she took the journey with her daughter, and then now she has a special memory with her daughter. And the thing about homecoming moms, I think people who grew up with the tradition and value it from a young age understand this, but a mom is not one day. A mom is the anticipation of the mom. But then after that, the mom lives on the kid's wall in their bedroom. And especially for kids who have had many moms or have been anticipating a mom, they get to see it every day. And it's a very special reminder of a moment in time, like you said, most likely with a woman who's special to them, was involved in making that mom or helping them select the mom if they purchase it from a mom maker or whatever. But it's not just about individual self-expression. There's an automatic plug into the community or to the family when one looks at a mom that's been worn by someone and a day has been experienced in the mom by someone. That is a little hard to describe unless you've been a part of its creation and its execution.
Did you dig into the history?
I did.
Of the tradition? I mean,
I
how
did.
How did this start?
Well, I always feel like I want to ask you, do you want the short version or the long version?
Oh, I always want the long version.
Okay, great. I love old newspapers, especially newspapers that existed before television. I think they can tell you a lot if you're willing to take the time. So I've been taking my time with the research because my research started with anecdotes, but then I actually moved more to a real researcher space. So I spent about a summer digging into old newspapers from not just from across Texas, but across the country, and also read every article that I could find, primarily in lifestyle magazines. Like Cosmopolitan has done a story about homecoming moms, Southern Living, that shouldn't be a surprise. I was actually shocked. I found a story, this is many years ago, by the Wall Street Journal about the business of homecoming moms. And then I live in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So I've seen stories in business presses about the moms, of course, and then ultimately television coverage. So actually there's a lot out there, but what was interesting to me was to go all the way back. And so I took different tracks. I looked at the start of football in America, starting at the kind of scrappy, we're killing each other on the field football that, is sort of romanticized in movies. And then moving that to a more civilized space in college football. And shortly after college football got started, really high schools kind of jumped on the bandwagon. And we're talking about the 1910s. In the meantime, and of course, this is before World War I. In the meantime, of course, there's very formal social conventions. And so the idea that football is becoming, not just a man's sport, but something you could take a date to, immediately meant a corsage was going to be involved, because that's what you did. If you're a proper boy and you're asking a proper girl to go to a game that has a dance afterwards, you're going to give her a corsage. And as it turns out, during this time in our country's history, chrysanthemums were all the rage. Like brides were using them for their bridal bouquets, and they're a fall flower that bloom, and they're super hardy. Like they can make it as an actual real flower. They can make it through a football game and a dance. And so it was a natural marriage. of football, dating conventions, and floral availability. And that really started, as I said, before World War I. And then homecoming as an entity is a whole nother tradition in and of itself. But to summarize it, homecomings really became, let me back up. Homecomings really were a concept well before football homecomings. We talked about pastors coming home to visit churches. I found references in the 1800s. I'm guessing it went back a lot farther than that. But the word homecoming had a meaning already for us in this country. It had to do with pastors going home to visit a previous church. It meant soldiers coming home from war, which is a very powerful image. And then interestingly, it also meant sororities and fraternities having alumni come back and visit them, because sororities and fraternities were being introduced in land-grant colleges right around the time colleges were introducing football. So that's where homecoming came from. So now you've got a lot of different pipelines into the tradition, but this is across the United States. And so the truth of the matter is, homecoming mums as just a live flower, something that you could pin. Can you imagine pinning a mum to your lapel now? But you could pin a corsage, like a homecoming chrysanthemum corsage to your clothing for decades, starting in the 1910s, well past World War II. So what happened in Texas? The very first thing that happened in Texas is that everybody wants to live in Texas. And so when there was a population explosion after World War II, people wanted to go where they could live, where they could build a house, where they could raise a family, and where there was land. And so Texas experienced a population boom like nobody's business in the 50s and the 60s. And what this meant was that high schools were popping up all over the state. And so if you just narrow it way down, and we're just talking about homecoming moms now, at this point, homecoming moms were live chrysanthemums, right? And so where did they come from? 100% of homecoming moms came from florists. So you're a little florist in a little town, and you're the florist that makes corsages and bridal bouquets and funeral arrangements. Like, this is what you do, right? And so now all of a sudden these high schools are being built and people are moving like crazy, and it's super hard to keep up with the population growth, right? So what's a florist to do? Well, 50s, especially in the 60s, we started getting better at manufacturing artificial flowers so that they didn't look so garish. And so florists, because they're smart and they're entrepreneurial, started thinking, I think maybe I need to make these flowers out of artificial materials so that I can make them in advance. And so this idea started being spread by wholesalers that were distributing artificial chrysanthemum flowers and other kind of flowers across the state, and florists jumped on the bandwagon. Well, then let's fast forward to the 70s. It's going to take a while for people who think live flowers are beautiful to sort of accept the idea that an artificial flower is a suitable substitute, socially speaking. Like, I don't want to wear that tacky thing, right?
Yeah.
So it took a little bit of time. Well, then what started happening is the DIY movement. As we know it, the very beginning of the DIY movement really started happening when large retail box stores started popping up. Well, guess where they started? In Texas. So Michael's was founded in Texas in the 70s. So, and then Hobby Lobby's headquarters is in Oklahoma City. So the supply chain of artificial flowers basically started in North Texas. And so if you give a mom the ability to take an artificial flower, which now we're sort of thinking is, well, maybe that's okay, and you give her a glue gun, especially in the 70s and the 80s when we were there were recessions, there were reasons to do things DIY. Maybe you couldn't afford to pay a florist to do a large scale mum for your kid. Well, guess what, my friend? You're going to make that mum yourself. And as soon as mothers entered the marketplace, they were the disruptors. Artificial mums and moms at home completely disrupted the entire supply chain for moms. And so what you find today is very few florists are still in the mom business because they can't afford to be. They can't afford the storage space. So they can't keep all of the ribbon colors that their customers demand, right? I'll take Arlington because I'm familiar with the Arlington market. There's like 6 or 7 high schools in Arlington. So that would mean that florist would have to have 6 or 7 different high school colors of ribbon and trinkets and feather boas and everything else that the customer demand in a back room sitting for most of the months out of the year. They can't afford it, but home-based mom makers don't mind. And so they can handle the overhead and they can assign a room in their home to make mums. And so moms can go to Michael's and get DIY. Home-based mom makers are willing to absorb the cost of overhead. And so the supply chain all got pushed into the wholesale area. And so you will find wholesalers all over the state. I'm familiar with those in my area. I know that there are wholesalers and mom-based businesses in Texas that have a ton of inventory. That's where all the inventory went. And the rest, my friend, is history. Well, and then the rest is history because moms are super creative. Home-based mom makers are an extraordinarily creative group. These are the people that make their own holiday wreaths. Their Christmas trees are extraordinary. Their Easter decorations are beautiful. They dress for football games head to toe. Like, these are people that are really into traditions and are into, in my book, in Mumentous, I say you're wearing your heart on your sleeve. And in Texas, homecoming moms are the perfect example of us wearing our hearts on our sleeves. That's what we're doing. And this is just the place where the idea really grew up. And then there's the whole Texas, everything's bigger in Texas thing. I think that's a real call to action for Texans. It's a challenge, but also a reality that we embrace wholeheartedly in lighthearted, beautiful, unique ways that is just not true in other states. And so then that's the cultural influence on homecoming moms is, why wouldn't we see how big we could make a mom? Like, we're Texans, that's what we do. I grew up in Florida. I had a homecoming mom in the 80s in Florida. Mine was a live mom. You can read that. It's an early chapter in my book, Mumentous. I had a live mom that my boyfriend gave to me. And when he showed up at my house and stood on my doorstep and presented me a chrysanthemum in the 80s, when in Texas, they were getting bigger and bigger already, I looked at this one single flower and I thought, this is the ugliest thing I've ever seen. And before I would put it on my body, my mom and I snuck to the back room and we cut off half the ribbon and we took off the trinkets because I was not having it. And he didn't notice because he just went to the florist and said, I'll take a homecoming mom, please. And it was like Henry Ford and, the manufacturer of the original Ford automobiles. You can have every color you want as long as it's black. That was the same thing across the country. Homecoming moms, you can have any mom you want, but you're going to get, it's always going to look the same. It's going to have your school colors and the ribbons and that's it. But that's not what was happening in Texas. By the 80s in Texas, are you kidding? Moms, there were all kinds of rules about moms. A single flower meant you were underclassmen, and a double mom meant you were, a junior, and a triple mom meant you were a senior, and maybe you could add white ribbon. Texans already knew the rules at that point, and I was in Florida, and all I wanted was to get this thing as small as I could get it. Which is so embarrassing to admit. How could I possibly write a book about moms?
I've come a long way on that journey myself, learning more about it, because it is, not being from here, not being raised in it. My daughter goes to a high school where they don't have football or homecoming. So
do they have basketball?
No, they don't have any sports.
No sports. Okay, no sports.
Focused, but yeah. So I hadn't been enmeshed in it. It's a thing that was on the periphery.
Sure.
And I think there is this attitude towards them by people like myself who move here, who just think, oh, it's silly. It's this silly tradition. It's ridiculous. Like, why would you do that? But then you really get talking to these women and generations who have watched it evolve and who are so proud to work on their granddaughters or their daughters. I don't know. It just.
I hear you. And, and it is hard. If there is a tradition that has been evolving for over 100 years, which is, what I talk about in the book, that this is 100-year-old tradition. And if you are new to that tradition and you're jumping in at this point, it's hard to understand it and it's hard to feel it. Traditions are something that you feel, not just practice. And so maybe you could practice it because you see that's what's happening around you. But if you really want to feel any tradition, you really have to just take away your preconceived notions and try to figure out what it really means. And I think in this day and age, it is important to figure out what it means to you, as well as to your community, and then see if you have a place within that. I think that is the only way that traditions will survive. And so what I love about this tradition and the way that kids today are manifesting it in a way that's different than previous generations, I talk about this in the book, is that they are really, like school by school, kids are really trying to figure out how to make this tradition more inclusive, which I find to be very heartwarming. And if there's anything that's being disruptive right now about the tradition, I actually think that's what it is. Because if you think about it, back in the day, moms were simply something that a boy gave a girl to go to homecoming. And if you didn't have a date, you didn't get a mom. And that's an exclusive tradition, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now for some families, moms might give their daughters a corsage to wear to homecoming. That's still a practice today. So there are ways to be more inclusive. But what I love, and I'm so, like, it kind of makes me a little misty to think about, are the stories that I've heard from Texans all across the state about groups of students that are trying to figure out how to include more students in the tradition. So for instance, I've talked to more than one school where there is a group of students who make moms for students who are in either have physical or mental disabilities and are, have not been traditionally included in sort of these homecoming traditions. And so they're making moms for those kids. I love this one school in particular. It's just so sweet. They work with the teachers who oversee that part of the curriculum. They contact all of the students' parents to make sure it's okay with the parents that student gets a mom or a garter. So the parents are involved, but it's a secret. So that makes it fun. Because, some of those students are dating, so maybe they're already exchanging a mom and they don't need to have a mom. So let's not make any assumptions that those students aren't socially active, right? And so for the students who would not expect to get a mom or a garter, there are other students, they make them themselves after school activity. And then during the day, when everybody else is exchanging their moms at home at night, they deliver the moms to the classrooms and explain the tradition and show them how to wear it and tell them when to wear it if they aren't familiar with the tradition. And so on Friday, when homecoming day comes and all the students who want to participate in the tradition and are wearing the moms, those students are right there with everybody else. And I'm telling you, when I dug deep enough to find stories like that, I'm like, okay. Not to put too fine a point on it, but if this is where we're going in society, where we're trying to figure out how to include people, I think we're going to be okay. Like, I really think we're going to be okay.
And this is how I got introduced, which I think is the best possible course of action. It wasn't so much on social media and seeing kind of the social status moms, like my mom's the biggest, it cost thousands, hundreds.
Which of course, and this is an important point to make, that is absolutely part of the complicated truth telling about moms.
Is that there has been.
Is that for some people, it's a celebration of conspicuous consumption. the amount of money that someone spends on a mom has absolutely nothing to do with what that mom means. Nothing. And a $1,500 mom, I hope, is extremely meaningful to the person who gave it and the person who wore it. But I can tell you, I have met a lot more students who are wearing $50 to $150 moms who have the best stories about where that mom came from. And they are just as proud to wear that mom as the student who's wearing, you know, sort of the mega moms. And their stories are just as beautiful.
I love that. No, so I was starting to tell you the mom who got me involved, that when I mentioned the buddy earlier, that's what, so the dance team makes a garter or a mom for students who are in the high school special ed program who wouldn't necessarily.
Oh, they do that for.
That's every single member of the dance team adopts a buddy and makes it and takes
That's
notes,
beautiful.
you know, talks to the teacher, talks to the parents, what are their passions, because you can choose from so many trinkets, right? Like, so making it personalized. And that's how I got introduced to this. So I want to ask you, were there any big surprise takeaways you learned while putting this together?
Yes, there's a number of them. I don't know if I can, I'll do my best to be succinct. I think the surprise takeaway is what you talked about just a minute ago, this idea of inclusivity, and also that the moms that you see in social media don't necessarily represent the majority of what homecoming moms look like. There are so many different kinds of homecoming moms, and there's no one right answer. And let's not forget garters too, of course, because boys wear garters. My other takeaway really is that the entrepreneurial aspect of the story, there are so many primarily women-run businesses, small businesses across the state of Texas that are helping to drive this tradition and shape the tradition. And these are superheroes in the mom world because they believe in it so much. They want everybody to, you know, dive in and have fun. And, you know, as I really think about it, there are thousands of high schools in the state of Texas. I think the count is over 3,000 high schools in the state of Texas. And I can guarantee you that wherever there's a high school that has a homecoming and has moms, let's say 3,000, there's going to be a professional mom maker in that community. And if there's a professional mom maker in that community, she has a competitor, because that's just the way it is. So what that means is there are at minimum 6,000 small businesses in the state of Texas devoted to homecoming moms. And that was an epiphany for me. And so that was why in my book, I started to really pursue what I call the momtrepreneurial side of the story, and started to get to know the women who make them at all different levels. You know, home-based businesses that only last as long as there's kids in school, and businesses that have been around for 25 and 30 years. And those women are absolutely defending homecoming moms as a tradition, but really they are passionate about traditions in their community, period. And I think that traditions are part of what makes a culture unique. And so I think they really believe that moms in Texas and football and family and community are inextricable. And that's why I keep using the word defender, because they really believe in what they're doing. Sure, they're making money, but more importantly, they're keeping something special alive that they believe in, and that's spirit and passion for one's community.
That's the mom queen I talked to.
The mom queen.
I asked why she keeps doing it, and it was the girls when they see their mom, but then also her employees, her like helpers were there.
Yeah.
We're telling, like, she can tell you the backstory of every mom that's, like, you know, every mom they're working on. She can tell you, oh, this girl is really passionate about golf, but she's, you know, when she goes to college, she's going for an engineering degree. And every year she's doing 500 moms, but she can tell you about every recipient of every mom.
Beautiful.
And those stories are what keep her coming back. So I don't want to harp on that. I think my last question, maybe before I ask you if there's anything you want to add, is
Sure.
did you look at across the state how each region kind of has different trends and traditions linked? I mean, I know every single school does, but I think they're shorter in South Texas. There's like
It can
different.
be. Yes, I did. You know, I hope you get a chance to read the book.
I'm going to.
Yeah, I didn't go into the details of how the tradition varies from region to region, but it's true. Particularly along the border of Texas, because there's this rich Hispanic and Mexican influence on moms and the tradition of quinceañera, which can be reflected in moms. And I think it's really beautiful and wonderful. And then, you know, moms are traveling. So there's moms in New Mexico and Oklahoma and elsewhere. And those states and schools definitely have their influence. But, you know, I think moms, they grow up in a community, right? And so if a community tends to be a little less demonstrative, maybe it's more conservative or maybe socioeconomically, you know, the moms are going to reflect the values of the community. And even though social media is starting to get that mixed up a little bit, you know, you'll see a mom in South Texas that you could have sworn was made in North Texas. I really do think those community values and the norms of the school will always, and just the taste of the kids, you know, what they like and what they're into, that's always going to drive the tradition. I hope it's always going to drive the tradition to at least remaining somewhat regionally distinct, because I think that makes it special.
It absolutely does. Okay, was there anything else that you wanted to mention, make sure that I add before this cuts us off?
Yes, there's a couple things I want to mention. So my book, Mumentous, was published this year. So it's very, I think it's up to date in terms of mom traditions, as well as the history. But it really leans on the storytelling of women who are involved in driving the tradition, as well as the students who participated in it and what it means to them. And, you know, while trends will change, fundamentally, I don't think those feelings will change. You know, I think moms are here to stay. So that's one point I just wanted to make. The second thing I wanted to mention is I've been working on this book a long time. I started in 2016 working on Mumentous. And in 2019, the photography that's in the book is mine. As I mentioned earlier, I wanted to get away from portraiture, and I really wanted to shoot pictures of students living in their moms during the day. So the photographs that are in the book are more about that, as well as the women who make them and design them and sort of help drive that tradition. So my photography was actually exhibited at the Arlington Museum of Art in 2019 as a photography exhibit called Mumentous. And that was a platform for me writing my book. So fast forward to today, the book was released, and I'm very excited to say that because my book is supported by a lot of research, there's going to be a traveling history exhibit based on my book that's launching this fall in Grapevine, Texas, and it's going to be traveling around North Central Texas. And I'm just really excited that I'm hoping it will stimulate feelings of nostalgia. I'm also hoping it will stimulate conversation about traditions and Texans and what it means to keep traditions alive and yet at the same time allow them to evolve to reflect the current culture.
You can learn more about Schultz and Mumentous in this article on KHOU.com. And remember, Homecoming Mums, a Texas-sized tradition, is streaming now. We are so glad you're here. Make sure you like and subscribe so we can let you know when we post. Also, check these out.